Hello everyone, welcome to the first official but technically second post-production commentary video going over Splatoon 3's balance, loop, and paradox. I had some people ask that they wanted to see the script, and truthfully, the scripts are not something I always write, nor do they always match. In this case, the script is already a pretty cut down version, but it's not exactly what I have in the video, but it is here if you want. You can see a few more notes at the top, like some posts that I went through and some thumbnail notes. But yeah, that's really all I gotta say about that. So let's jump into the video. Alright, so one thing to immediately talk about with the video is the intro. It's kind of obvious here, but I don't think anyone really talked about in the comments, but if you listen to how the video starts, I'm going to show you the hidden paradox of Splatoon's wider balance history that's been slowly building in the background, and why exactly the devs are really struggling to escape it. Since this is it kind of just jumped straight into the video, which is a call I made, but that wasn't how the video was originally supposed to go. Actually, is this something I had in the script? Maybe I did. Ah, I do. I totally forgot. But you can see in the script, I totally had a line before this, and in fact, I even said a bit more before that line. So originally, I had a little bit more of an intro going for this video, but I just didn't like how it sounded. I really wanted this to be a video that had some kind of intro graphic to it, like a little, cutscene that plays or something. But I couldn't really find anything that worked, and I found that the intro just kind of took too long. I felt like it took a little bit too much to get into the point, and I especially felt for viewers who clicked on it that it would be like really unengaging, I guess. Like I didn't feel like the video did a good job of hooking you. So in this case, the best solution I found was just jump into the topic sooner. Like just get started immediately. They already know what they clicked on. Anyway, back to this. Loop will begin our story at the current endpoint, the endgame meta of Splatoon 3. So, when working on this video the first time, like when going into production, I knew that I mostly wanted to focus it around the loop of endgame Splatoon 2 and like the kind of endpoint of Splatoon 3. I want to briefly talk about potential other metas and what they mean, because that's kind of the main thing that got cut in this video. And I'm surprised more people didn't ask about it, but like, for example, what about crab meta? Crab meta doesn't really follow this logic. What about like the MPU damage up stuff? What about that? So once we get toward the end, I'm going to talk about those briefly. I was going to do this on stream, but I decided it would probably be better for this video anyway, because I don't think it would take that long. But we'll get there in a minute. I think for the most part, the story really does revolve around this, and I did kind of add like later that, hey, we can also... Splatoon 1 also did kind of feed into this with how the balance changes happen at the end of that game, and that's a good contrast to shooters, and how shooters not being nerfed, played well into Splatoon 3. So it's like, nerfs clearly didn't work here, but they, not doing nerfs worked here. I can, like, pull on an example. So Splatoon 1 still got to be roped into this a decent amount. I could have probably also talked more about Splatoon 1's meta and what that was, but again, I felt it was like, hey, I can kind of say that Splatoon 1 has a more aggressive meta, more akin to this, and you can see the loop, and it's not that hard to figure out. So this is a thing that didn't make it into the video, but I wanted all of these icons to be Splatoon weapons originally. They're still, like, based off Splatoon weapons, like, obviously the sword here is referencing Stamper, but, like, I wanted it to literally be those. So, like, mobility weapons would literally be Ink Brush, like, Umbrella would be, the shielding stuff, the fighting weapons are, like, actually Stamper, stuff like that. Ended up just being like more normal icons that reference the Splatoon weapons, but it was an idea in production that didn't make it in. Think of big hitbox weapons like Range and S-Blast, or Decavitator. These can all also one-shot you. If they're not able to instantly kill you, then they better get pretty close. Bucket does 70 damage in one hit. Pencil does 68. Stamper has like 3 ways of doing 70. That part in the script actually took a lot to get right, because I had to communicate both, like, the instant kill weapons that feature bigger hitboxes and, like, your 70-ish damage weapons. And it was kind of awkward trying to, like, phrase those all into one coherent sentence that, like, still covered everything. But that's what the end result was. But that took several rescripts to get sounding that good that quickly. Wow, look at all the AoE and large damage numbers we have. Why not pair all of these with some big hitbox weapons or options to cover kills quickly, such as burst bombs for instance, to convert all the high damage into instant death. But yeah, the goal of this is pretty simple. It's like, yeah, we literally have to explain like what the meta is actually about in like 30 seconds. In like 30 seconds, catch up people who might not know a whole lot about the game as to why the meta is the way it is. Basically explain the strategy around it, which is something I actually haven't done very much. Like, I've talked about what weapons are good and why, but I haven't really talked about the big picture of like, okay, but why is that valuable? What's the overall strategy? And that's something that I feel I should have done sooner, but here you go. You get the Cliff Notes version. While much less of an issue than previous meta problems, this is still a clear dominant strategy, and the game can be improved by having other strategies be better, which the devs have attempted to solve in the most straightforward way. This was another line that I had to pick very carefully, because what I wanted to communicate here is there should be more ways of playing the game. There should be more depth in this. But I also want to try to make it clear that that's the point, and not that this meta is particularly bad. Because it's really easy to look at this and just go, oh, meta bad. And that's, again, a thing I talk about at the end. But, like, obviously the playstyle that is common, the comps that are common, are still generally pretty cool, pretty interactive, pretty fun. Like, obviously, it does well. Like, the comp scene is doing well with this meta. So, like, you know, this is a necessary criticism, but it also still needs to, you know, get across that, like, this is about the fact that other strategies aren't good, not a problem with this strategy itself existing. This strat is fine, it's just by itself. Just nerf all the main weapons that cause that. And this is a solution that anyone familiar with my channel... I just realized now we should have had this be the other S-Blast. It's the wrong S-Blast. Anyway. The main weapons that cause that. And this is a solution that anyone familiar with my channel will know I disagree with. But let me put aside my... And finally, I get to talk about, like, I've talked about, like, I'm super, like, main weapon power and buff focused and all that stuff, but it's also... There are a lot of situations in other game balances where buffs aren't the right answer. There are, like, reasons or situations where that isn't the correct solution. But I really wanted to talk about how, like, the nerfs just don't work and why they don't work. And you know, everything past this, like, in that explanation, I feel is basically perfect. It was basically the core of the video. It's one of the main things I really wanted to get across, and I honestly just, it came across well. I don't think I have much notes on it. So look at any tournament over a year ago versus now, and the playstyle of the weapon has just fundamentally shifted. This one was always going to be the hardest point to, like, illustrate, so I kind of just kept it short. Like, I'm figuring that most people will just take my word for it, but, like, especially, like, I have watched, you know, I coach Moonlight, obviously. I coach Basil a lot. Like, I watch her play Pen probably more than the other teammates, because when I'm, like, spectating a tournament, or watching a tournament, like, I'm not in spec mode. I'm, like, watching the POV streams, and then I talk to them between the games or between the sets, right? So, more often than not, if I'm not, like, bouncing between POVs to see which one I should be watching, I'm most often going to watch the pen, because the pen has, like, the greater vision over the entire map. But this also means that I'm naturally watching Basil more than most other players on the team, just because, you know, that's the role where I can see everybody else to kind of see the wider picture of what's going on with team fights. And that's generally where a lot of my advice has to be in the middle of a tournament. Like, the fighting level of pens at, like, a year ago to now is just... It's so incomprehensibly different. Like, I cannot demonstrate it through footage alone. I really can't. But, like, it is legitimately just very different, and you kind of just have to take my word for it that, like, there is such an emphasis on fighting and damage and taking space and being aggressive. And a year ago, you did not have to have that emphasis because it was just about getting the coolers. But now it's like, getting the coolers the way you used to is just, like, expected to do regardless. Like, you're expected to manage both. And that's cool. I really like that. That's the smaller part, though. Let's go back to before 9.0. The best support in the game is Neo Splash. So obviously the supports were a lot easier to demonstrate. Funny part about doing this script, I asked for feedback from a few other higher level players. I was, like, talking to them, and, like, I had some comments on, like, I'm not entirely sure about the Dooley and Splattershot Pro stuff, like, if that's gonna be there, and I'm like, yeah, it's fine. I mean, like, you know, the script is, like, a few weeks early, so this was, like, three weeks earlier or something like that, and I'm like, yeah, it's fine. If the script is wrong, I can just change it later. Like, this point isn't, like, it wouldn't kill the video if it's wrong. But in my head, I'm like, dude, I know I'm not wrong here. Like, this was totally, and there's no way the meta doesn't go this way. Like, I was practically certain that I wouldn't have to change it, which is why I wasn't worried. And, yeah, no, everyone's picking Dooley and Pro now. Like, all the teams are running it. Like, the other stuff like Splash, you'll still see stuff like Splash. It's still good. But, like, I feel like it's now relatively agreed on that the Pro and Dooley stuff is just better. So, that's kind of funny. weapon that almost never fights, pretty much exclusively paints, and doesn't have a super special that focuses on damage combos whatsoever. And another part of the script that got cut here, I wanted to have like a little disclaimer. Hey guys, like I know Neosplash doesn't contribute to the problems that we're talking about here. However, Neosplash is still an unhealthy spawn of Satan that spawns Tri-Strikes and gets 3,000 pain a game, and it's still not the archetype of weapon we should want to be good. But again, I felt like it was too off topic. Again, the video was already long, especially when I had other stuff that wasn't cut, and I'm like, I think people understand that special spam 3k pain a game does not have ability to interact with the enemy is probably not a healthy playstyle. It's kind of self-explanatory. Oh, I will say, third weapon potentially. This one's a bit too new to say, but it would still follow the same idea. Mini. Not Zuka Mini, Zimmy. Though you will also play a bit of Zuka Mini and a bit of Hammer Mini. And Mini would follow the same logic. Mini is also more fight heavy than Splash when played optimally. Trust me, everyone tried the Zuka spam Mini and just playing it that playstyle on all the maps, it clearly didn't work. It was like annoying, it's overtuned, it shouldn't be able to do that, but it wasn't good. So if Mini joins like Dooley and Pro as like a meta support, it's mostly going to be Bubble Mini, and it's also going to be fight heavy. But yeah, in this case, not proven enough, so I didn't say anything about it, but like, could also apply. Being second place in that same area cup. These weapons barely even fit the support role and fight way more than the previous ones did. And I remember like a few months ago arguing that Dooley should be played in the support slot. And like I would get pushback on that. Like there were a few players that agreed with it, but there would also be a few people that disagreed about it. And now like it's the standard in that slot. I think the difference back then is people really questioned about like the paint utility and stuff like that. But now people get that it's like, dude, you just gotta, like, you can't sack fighting power. You cannot lose it. You will notice it at this level of play. And if you think about it, it makes sense. Because it doesn't change the fact that this overall strategy is what's good. So, of course, people are gonna do anything they can to stick with it. And if anything, you're just incentivized more now to really make sure you have that power, where it was much easier to have that level of fighting power with fewer weapons prior. But this is one of the few times I had a repetitive line actually stay in the script. Like, that whole bit of, like, but if you think about it, it makes sense, is entirely reiterative. It's not saying anything new, but it's like, this point has to be, like, really understood, and I felt like before it was still really fast. So, this is one of the few cases, because generally with videos like this, like, I assume people are paying attention, and I also try to respect people's time. I don't need to ramble about something they already know or that I've already said. And like, obviously that's not something I'm perfect at, but I generally try to do that, which means oftentimes this kind of repetitive stuff ends up getting cut. But again, this was one of those cases where it's like, I feel like it's really important and it actually bears repeating to make sure that like, that's the center of people's mind. Because when we switch to Splatoon 2, the point has to be the same thing. Like, the same idea needs to already be in your head so we can get through Splatoon 2 faster, because I can't take as long with Splatoon 2 as we took with Splatoon 3 here. So the point already needs to be clear. Okay, the strategy is what matters, not the weapons that are a part of it. It is the strat that is important. Okay, if nerfing these weapons doesn't work. Also, I really like that the Rude Buster sound really fits well with the double down arrows, because like it looks similar to the Rude Buster icon, the sound effect, like that's a really cool edit. Which is mobility and shielding. Both of these are pretty obvious. They just provide tools that slow down these fast kill times. If you're familiar with Moonlight's 96 tent mid comp, you can— Okay, so something else I want to talk about in this video. I referenced Moonlight a lot in this video. Like a lot, instead of showing a lot of other teams. And the reason is because this stuff just is not that common anymore. Like, when teams do use it, like when we saw the Gluger, we saw these guys, or like whatever, it does clearly work against our better teams. It does show those adaptions. But the amount of people who are like using strats that are this clearly distinct, that are also like having success enough for me to pull examples from, that are also recent enough to be relevant to the video, like that aren't pointing to an underdeveloped or old meta, are few and far between. And so ideally I'd wanted to have to point to more things besides Moonlight, but it's just, there aren't that many things to point to that like show this works. And that's where these fast kill weapons can show more of their problems. Mainly that they're all really ink hungry, they're generally pretty slow, and they especially don't want dragged out fights because they tend to rely on powerful sub-weapon combos. Okay, this was also really important to put in, and again, another thing where I kind of added to the script a little bit to go in more detail about this. These weapons have problems. They are not perfect guns. This is always something that can happen where, like, a weapon is perceived differently and then its perception changes later and people think, like, you know, you just overlooked something about the weapon. No, it's the meta shifts that matter. Like, this is what happened with Pencil before it was good. Like, it wasn't just the buffs. The meta was legitimately terrible for Pencil. You could put those buffs on Pencil and it would not have been good in Crab meta because the meta wasn't good for it. Here, it's like the opposite thing. It's like, these weapons do have problems. You just don't notice them because the weapons that exploit those problems aren't as prominent in the meta. But if they were, these weaknesses would be there, and you can't look at these weapons and pretend these problems aren't there. And subsequently, you know, if the future happens and, like, S-Blast gets giga nerfed and then we have some fucking ink brush meta, S-Blast will feel even more terrible because of that, you know, like that kind of deal. So that's worth noting, where it's like, these weapons do have problems. There are ways to exploit them. It's just that the weapons that exploit them aren't picked as much because it's less worth picking them over just mirroring the same weapons on your end. That's a problem. Also, shout out to Villy finding incredibly good footage for this one because this ink brush example gameplay is perfect. A higher chance to avoid damage and stall out the fight that way, as well as being able to take like more split angles, making it harder for you to get 2v1'd and comboed to death. So you can see it, and I talked about it before, but Splatoon 2's moves way faster, because essentially, we're talking about the exact same thing. Like, this is the same thing that we're talking about. This is what the meta is, this is the weapons that are good in it, this is what happens when they get nerfed, and this is why it doesn't work because of the overall strategy. We just spent 4 minutes on that. This is just the opposite side of the exact same coin. And so because of that, in order to help with pacing, Splatoon 2 flows way faster. Like, I don't want to take the same amount of time, because at that point it would be, like, that I feel would really kill the pacing. Like, at this point, I feel like it's kind of obvious that we're talking about the same thing, so keep it moving. Well, my recording froze, so the rest of the video has my commentary, but it doesn't move and it looks bad, so we're doing it all over again. And that's also why this video is a bit late, my bad. And shooters were still fairly mobile. They could make up for their fighting power by their special output, and the paint allowed them to play to the same strength of being difficult to kill. I can't stress enough that this is the same strategy, just in a far less interesting and interactive way. This was another rescript that I added, and it's again another repetitive one, because I feel like I really need to make it clear that even though none of the weapons are the same, this is the core strategy. It was another thing that I felt, okay, this point has to be hammered in, that the overall meta can be the same and the comps can be totally different. And unfortunately, this was one thing I didn't talk about as much. But originally there was another section speculating, if all the good midlines get nerfed, what would Splatoon 3's version of this endgame meta be like, this stale version of it? In this case, it would probably be something like Try-Zuka heavy meta, like just spamming specials like Zuka that could easily get kills, or specials that prevented those kills like Bubble, and having a high, you know, prioritizing weapons that could output those specials quickly. But, you know, it's kind of impossible to predict for sure, but I think that is somewhat related to what the future could be if, like, enough of these fighting weapons just go away. One-shot weapons like blasters, rollers, and chargers had a much harder time breaking armor or finding faster kills. And now, I do emphasize armor a lot here because it's easiest to understand and faster, but I do say indirect changes because it's not the only factor. Like, the special design in general, the passive gameplay, especially the map design, which made it very easy to avoid especially the map design. Splatoon 2's map design made it very easy to avoid fights. It forced a lot of mid-fights in particular, which heavily favored special output with how it was laid out. The maps in Splatoon 2 were a problem. The specials got you through them, but there was almost no incentive to fight. All the, like, flank or fighting routes were generally pretty weak, and if they weren't, like a map like Snapper, it was probably one of the hidden gems of that game. Most of these got no help from meaningful buffs either, so they weren't powerful enough to deal with these options by the end. And again, I should have probably stated this here, but like, hey, guess what game these weapons were all good in? The previous one, a special lineup that didn't favor these types of weapons, it hurt them even more, putting them in a balance spot where they're not quite at the power level to compete with the meta options. Another section where I had to simplify this, like in this case I went with the specials example. I talked about the maps a bit later hurting them, but like there's multiple indirect factors at play here. It's more than what I'm saying in the video. It's just for the purposes of time, you know, I can't say everything here. I have to move at a pace that's important, so I try to keep it to the stuff that's most important because I think for most people this is enough to get the picture. Again, I appreciate that shooters exist as the example of like, hey, look what happens if you don't over-nerf a weapon that's going to be affected indirectly in the next patch. All shooters needed were the special outputs being toned back. Obviously, the buffs they gave it were a lot, but like they were combat mobility-focused buffs. That was the right way to make a weapon stronger. I can't stress enough how bad it is. I know Splatoon 2 already gets shit for it, but like, on top of the game-breaking Ray special, which will get its own video soon enough, by the way, armor just completely warped the balance of the game. It, like, I don't think there's ever been a special that affected how good weapons were more than armor. Like, I don't think anything even comes close to it. It's insane to think how much the balance of the game was affected by just that one special existing. Gives them more chances for one-on-one fights and a higher likelihood of being able to drag out engagements. I've seen some pushback on this, mainly that, like, you know, certain weapons like tents can benefit from the map design because you're forced to encounter the shield. But again, this is a more general thing. I'm not going as specific. These types of weapons generally want to drag out fights. They are generally better in 1v1s. The more open the map design is, the more ways there are to go, the more likely you're finding separated fights. And it works backwards for Splatoon 3's meta. Of course, if everyone's more likely to be clumped and come from one location, then all of the AoE stuff we talked about will, of course, be more likely to work off of each other. So while I can see some arguments for some individual weapons, as a overall broad playstyle adjustment, this is undoubtedly a nerf. Now, I know this Inkbrush one isn't too drastic, but it's mainly because Inkbrush and Dually Squelcher are examples where their mobility isn't exactly the thing that needs to be adjusted, it needs better kill power. And that's same deal for Inkbrush here. The fact that this is the best buff when it comes to this is what's sad. I should be able to point to like Umbrella HP buff mattering, but we haven't gotten like Umbrella HP buff or something like that. So, you know, there should be a better example. I'm aware that this isn't a game changer for the weapon, but it's still like the right direction. And in this case, this is just one of the few scraps we've gotten that actually works. Neo Splash and V-Shot were also both common counter pick options into this team, which again also fit the idea of decreasing that kind of kill power. So there was a few things we could have pointed to. This is just what Blitz chose when editing, and I just, you know, nothing wrong with it, so I rolled with it. I like that it was Wiper as an example too, though. So yeah, I'm not really here to go super in-depth for like how to balance these weapons. Yaga has a good video on it if you check out their channel. I should have it in the description. If I forget, just put it in the comments, like remind me in the comments. I also put it on my community tab, so I guess you can also just check there for that. But they did a video on balancing umbrellas, and that would have made the scope of this video way too large. I didn't feel it was needed. And like, there are multiple ways you can balance around this problem, so I didn't feel it needed to be listed in specifics. But yeah, the main thing we need is Brellas, which is, yeah, not a good sign because they haven't done a good job with those, and Brellas need like a lot of help. But that's right now. Splatoon 2 did have a more set of interesting weapons built around its core strategy, and it only This was a misspeak. It had a set of more interesting weapons. I just didn't care enough to fix it, but yeah, I jumbled the word order there. And yeah, I feel like it's important to note as much crap as I give Splatoon 2. And I give Splatoon 2 a lot of crap, and rightfully so. Splatoon 2 messed up a lot. Way more than Splatoon 1 and 3 did. However, Splatoon 2 did still have some really good and interesting eras. It deserves credit for those. It gets a lot of crap because it ended in a bad spot, and ending in a bad spot is admittedly really terrible. But you also can't look at Splatoon 2 and say it didn't have good metas. For all its problems, it did have some cool, unique things about it, and those things eventually got gutted. Splatoon 3 could have the same thing. I hope it doesn't, but it could. Became much worse as those got over-nerfed. While Splatoon 3 is more careful with its nerfs, it's currently heading in the same direction. It's just harder to notice because it's moving slower. But I do still think that this is a problem worth critiquing, especially long-term. To me, if we don't learn from the trends of our most recent patches or the series' broader history, it will be repeated. And I don't want to see what Splatoon 3's meta could become if we continue down the balance path we're doing right now. So I really hope we see a new approach soon. Thanks for watching. So yeah, this is one of my favorite videos I've ever done for the channel. Like, it's in the top 10 for sure. I'm extremely happy with how it came out, and it was basically just off a random Blue Sky conversation that finally, gave me, like, I've had a lot of this video's core ideas for a while, but it finally put everything together in a way where I could brand and present it properly, and just, I love how this video came out. Genuinely, this is one of my favorites. I think it's nearly flawless with its presentation. I'm so happy with how it came out, like, legitimately. This is one of those videos that I really like for a while. It's like up there with the Bubble Blower rework and similar stuff like that. If anything, it might be even higher than those videos. So yeah, thank you for the commentary. Sorry it got a little scuffed partway through since I had to re-record the second half, but I hope you all enjoyed, and I'll see you again next week.